In a world where everyone else reviews the same old cards, RegisKillbin returns in the most anticipated video of 2019. Custom Card Review Part 9. The Custom Card Review.
Hey buddy, watch this.
It's finally time. The custom card review has returned. This time around, we're looking at designs that fit into Rastakhan's Rumble. Let's jump into it. Up first here, we have a variation on Gonk the Raptor from a Mage Old as Dirt. Now, keep in mind, this was actually submitted before Gonk the Raptor was revealed. These are very old cards, but they're still pretty cool ones. And in fact, I like this version of Gonk the Raptor better. With this one, your hero actually gains attack equal to Gonk's attack. So at a base level, you get 3 attack when Gonk the Raptor is on the board, which on its own actually is pretty nice. That makes this comparable to something like a Fire Elemental right off the bat, where you just get to attack. So Gonk gets some instant activation, and that's nice. If Gonk sticks around on board, you're getting this permanent asset where your hero just gets a lot of extra attack, and that's really cool. Not to mention, this synergizes nicely with a buff style of Druid, which is something we've seen a lot in the past. So if you can buff Gonk up, not only can you maybe keep him alive longer with extra health, but if you buff his attack total, which Druid can do in a few different ways with Rastakhan's Rumble cards and old cards, then in fact, you can get lots of extra attack on your hero and make some really big plays or do tons of damage. And I think that's why this is actually a better fit for Druid's kit, both new and old, and a better way to express hero power synergies than what we see with Gonk right now, which is slower, a little bit more limited to like that OTK plan, and will require more support in the future to actually make it good. So to me, this Gonk gets it right. Moving on here, we have Tiger's Chosen from Nobody. This is a handy little 2-mana 3/2 minion for Paladin. Battlecry, the next spell you play this turn costs double and is cast twice. So perfect little fit for things that might want to use lots of buffs. You're basically doubling the value of any buff in your hand, turning it from 1 card essentially into 2 cards. And although this doesn't offer a tempo advantage because the cost is doubled, it still allows your buffs to go a little bit farther and stretch those resources into more onboard presence. And there are also other shenanigans possible and just good plays with things like Consecration. Sometimes you might need a 4 damage AoE, and this could help you get there. So it becomes this nice little utility tool that could also, with cost discounts for things like Prismatic Lens, maybe discount Blessed Champions and play multiple Blessed Champions on a single minion to double its attack twice. I can already imagine the line cracker shenanigans. So I think a flexible little guy that's very carefully costed here, which was a nice touch from Nobody, so that you can't use things like Blessed Champion or Spikered Steed by default. Has to be 4 mana or less, requires support to do extra, and I think that's perfect design. Very well executed here. Up next, we have Novice Challenger from Rob K, a 1-mana 1/1 Death Rattle that when it dies, 10 turns later, it kind of comes back as a 10-mana 10/10. Great story in fantasy here. A challenger goes in the arena, gets wrecked. It's kind of disturbing to think of this little child orc getting murdered in the arena, but apparently it survives to go train, comes back as a challenger return that's wreaking havoc in Rastakhan's Rumble. Awesome story, but also a cool card. It puts a clock on a game, this sense of impending doom. I really like that style of it, where you got to kind of remember when it's coming back, remember to save that resource. That creates friction, opportunity, great moments in the game. Also, this is just a nice little Death Rattle synergy card that if you want it to pay off, you got to sacrifice a little because it's not as good as a normal 1-drop. But if you think you can make it 10 turns later, this card could be fantastic. So certain decks might want to utilize that in a pretty intriguing way. Also probably just a really cool arena card as well. So all around, great design from Rob K. Up next is Conflagrate from Faroon, 2-mana Warlock spell that ties discards and overkill together in a really nice way. This one deals 5 damage to a minion for only 2 mana. First off, that's great. It's way better than something like Shadow Bolt right off the bat. And it has this overkill, which you could consider a downside or potentially an upside, depending on who's running this card, because you are going to discard your lowest cost card if you do too much damage to something. So hitting that Hinge Clan Thug that's at 4 health, you have to lose or sacrifice a card in order to get that really nice, cheap single target removal. In a normal deck, that might be worth the cost. In a discard deck, that could be a really nice bonus. That controlled discard could be valuable if you build around it and support it. So I think Conflagrate makes a lot of sense in that style of play, it would be a perfect tool to help get Discard Warlock over the hump that somehow mysteriously it still seems to not be able to get over. This could be the sort of card that solved some of those problems because it's such a good early tempo / control sort of card that it could make a big difference. Discarding your Clutch Mother Zavas, your High Priestess Jeklik into some big plays. So I like how this combines a couple of those different discard controlled mechanics along with an overkill. That's a great design. Moving on here, I wanted to talk about another discard synergy card, this time from E. LeBron, 2 mana, Voodoo Sacrifice. This one changes the direction a little bit. You discard a minion, but then you get a random spell that you previously discarded added back to your hand. So it's another level of finesse or control over what you're discarding, and in fact allows you to move your deck in a certain direction, playing towards spells as opposed to minions. And as we know, some minions are great to discard, the Jekliks, the Zavas. So if you have a hand that's supporting this kind of card well, you can do some great things. Sacrifice a spell in the early game like a Defile that you might need later. You get it back with Voodoo Sacrifice while simultaneously getting rid of the Jeklik in your hand. And although this is a bit of a tempo sacrifice because you're not really doing anything immediately with this card, it might still be worth it to help you manipulate your hand in some really creative ways. And that's why I like this, not to mention the artwork is perfect. The name is great, perfectly fitting for Rastakhan's Rumble, so I'm pretty happy with how this card turned out. Thank you, E. LeBron, for sending this one in. Up next is Sneak Attack from Titan, a rogue spell that again combines a couple keywords and mechanics in an interesting way. This time it's Echo and Overkill. Sneak Attack does 8 damage to a minion by default. If it overkills, though, you lose the Echo aspect of Sneak Attack. So, for instance, if your opponent has, a Lich King, a Jan'alai the Dragonhawk, and a Ragnaros, if you use Sneak Attack to kill Lich King, and then Ragnaros, and then Jan'alai the Dragonhawk, it's all going to work out fine. If you accidentally kill Jan'alai the Dragonhawk first, you lose your Echo. Lich King, Ragnaros are certainly going to seal your fate and murder you. But I like that because there's a check here on Sneak Attack being awesome. Because clearly 8 damage for 3 mana is great. We saw like Flame Lance before was an okay card. Sneak Attack is that, but cheaper. So sometimes it's just going to be that super fantastic, easy removal of a Lich King. And that's wonderful. But if you're not careful, if you want to hit some 4 health minions, you're not going to get as much value return. So it's actually not as good in the early game hitting smaller stuff because you don't get to utilize that aspect of the Echo. So you kind of got to save it for later maybe. And then even at that point, things still have to line up. It has to be that 8 or higher health minion if you don't want to lose your Echo. 9 health minions are particularly awkward for this card, but still a strong card that seems to match up ideally with what Rogue is all about. So I think this is a really cool card. Moving on here, it's the Rumble Regulator, a legendary minion for Warrior from Jazipa. A 9 mana 7/10 with Mega Taunt, and Mega Taunt, thankfully, was described here. Your opponent must target a minion with Mega Taunt before anything else. Spells, attacks, abilities, presumably hero powers, all have to run into the Mega Taunt. So it's basically taunt for spells and I guess even battle cries as well. So you're forcing your opponent's hand. Anything that can be targeted has to hit this guy first. And I think that's really cool. Even think about things like healing spells, for instance. They couldn't use them on their face. They'd have to use them on the Rumble Regulator until it died. So you can create all kinds of interesting disruption opportunities with this card, whether that's just forcing your opponent to attack into it because it just has normal taunt, forcing them to send fireballs into it. It's this universal defensive tool. All the same, though, it is a single minion. It's committing a lot for 9 mana. So something like, a Vile Spine Slayer, Shadow Word Death is going to dispose of this just as easily as any other threat. So in some ways, that makes it worse than a card like Obsidian Statue or Void Lord, other 9 mana taunts, because they have some other sort of value bundled into them. And I think that's why, although this is a very unique and powerful effect, it's not overpowered. I think it's just a neat design. Also, the fantasy of this one entity, this sort of referee of the Rumble, forcing everybody to attack him or deal with him. I think that's a really cool idea too. So all around, the Rumble Regulator is pretty awesome. Up next is the Mad Brawler from Imaginary MDA, a 1 mana 3/4 that reads, you can't gain mana crystals. And I love the idea of this card because it has this enormous downside, way worse than other downsides we've ever seen in the past, but also it's got a lot of stats for a 1-drop, and Priest can utilize stats in some pretty interesting ways. Not to mention, Priest can silence off negative effects. So it's got this kind of premise of power, this potential, but it's really hard to utilize and it can backfire in some major ways if you never gain mana. But beyond that, it just fits perfectly with the Priest 1 mana minion package and even the mana restriction package from Surrender to Madness that we saw in Rastakhan's Rumble. So it just looks like the ultimate kind of centerpiece, or I guess maybe puzzle piece, to slot into the rest of those cards. And I think that's so cool that it brings everything together in a single piece. And that's why I like this card so much. I think it's a high friction card, very interesting moments in the game where your opponent has dilemmas on what they do. Do they have to answer the 3/4? Do they, leave it so you never gain mana crystals? It's still a strong minion on turn 10 because it's got a reasonable stat line. You don't care about not gaining mana crystals once you get down to turn 10. So ultimately, I think a really cool little card that's probably not that good 97% of the time, but could still create some fun opportunities and just fits so well into the theme for Priest this expansion. Up next is Loafire, a 3-mana spell for Mage from I-Die, and this one again brings in some neat little overkill spins. It deals 3 damage by default, and then if it overkills, you shuffle a Loafire into your deck. So in a pinch, this is that kind of Forgotten Torch / Frostbolt 3 damage, where you just kill something and you're happy. But if you can kill something with less than 3 health, or set it up to kill something with less than 3 health, you get this pseudo-infinite resource being added to your deck, which can be great to counter fatigue, say, if you're in a control deck, but could also just be extra removal tools. And eventually it might not line up, and you might have to commit your final Loafire, but there's this opportunity for infinite value, but it's not infinite value that's super oppressive or scary because it's not that efficient. It's not that high tempo. You can't use it to go face forever because it's got to overkill to duplicate itself. And what that means is it's got limitations, which is the right kind of infinite value. Right now we have so many infinite value cards in Hearthstone's history, Jade Idols, even Rexar to some extent, that just still get bigger and scarier and crazy, and they just overwhelm. This is not that kind of card. So it creates a check and a balance with overkill that's fun, but still opportunities exist to turn it into something long-term or cool, and I like that a lot. So I think Loafire is a great fit for Mage. And then finally for my last card, this one's going to look familiar, and I just want to remind you, this card was submitted before cards were revealed for Rastakhan's Rumble, or before at least Gurubashi Chicken was revealed for Rastakhan's Rumble. I have the timestamp. I can 100% confirm that Mad Chicken from Lemons was submitted before the world knew about Gurubashi Chicken. And if you're not familiar, of course, Gurubashi Chicken, the actual Hearthstone card, is identical to this one outside of its name and artwork. Both are 1 mana 1/1 beasts with overkill, gain +5 attack. So I had to include this. I know at this point in your life it's not that exciting because Gurubashi Chicken's been out for a while, but Lemon's got this card exactly right. And if you can get a card exactly right, despite how bad it is, it's totally unplayably terrible as we've seen, that's still so impressive. And that means you're so in tune with what Hearthstone design looks like that I'm impressed enough to include it in the list. So Mad Chicken makes the cut. It really is Gurubashi Chicken. Lemons, you nailed it, man. Well done. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for part 9 of the custom card review. I know you never thought it was coming, but here it is. And I want to give you the details on the next custom card review submission. You can find all of them in the description and in a pinned comment below. But this time around, in honor of Ben Brode's announcement where he's going to be developing a Marvel game. Those of you who don't know, Ben Brode, the former game director of Hearthstone, is now going to be making a Marvel game at his new company. And I have a feeling it's going to be a card game. So I want you to make a custom card utilizing a Marvel character or ability, event, whatever you want it to be, but it's got to be based on Marvel. So no, you can't just make Void Contract and change its name to Thanos' Snap. That's not going to fly. But if you want to make Iron Man or Captain America, whatever it is, go for it. It has to still fit Hearthstone as far as its mechanics and stats are concerned. It needs to be a viable, realistic-ish Hearthstone card, but the name and the artwork can be based in the Marvel universe. Bonus points if you find drawn artwork that happens to match the Hearthstone style. But make me a Marvel Hearthstone card, or maybe like a Marvel Stone Heroes of Marvel card in Ben Brode's honor. But until then, thank you so very much for watching, and until next time, game on.